Okay, so we're really fortunate to be joined today by one of the preeminent real estate lawyers in the area. Jonathan does a lot of work with our team. He comes in, he sort of advises us as real estate agents on a lot of best practices, and he's been kind enough to join us today to sort of go through what a real estate lawyer does when we're closing a transaction. So, it's very simplified when we say a real estate agent helps you buy a house. There's a lot more to it. And when we say that a lawyer helps you close the house, there's far more to it than that as well. So, um, my first question is, we'll hear one of the jobs of a lawyer on closing is to check the title. Would you like to explain that to us, sort of, Jonathan?
Absolutely. And pleasure, Sean. And thank you for taking the time for me today, obviously, and get to know your audience. And, I love being on the one side of the mic. Now I get to be on the other side. And this is pretty cool because I don't have to think about the questions and make the whole agenda. I just get to be. So I'm yours today. I'm putting in your hands. And we're going to talk about what a real estate lawyer does and the role. And one of the first things I'm going to throw in a giant misconception is that people that don't understand and haven't been through a real estate transaction before, they're like, so I signed a deal, I'm ready to close my deal, and then, 1 or 2 days before, that's when the lawyer comes in and appears and just closes it. That's basically what you do, right?
Right.
And I'm like, no, no, no. There's so many layers to this thing. And one of the first things I'll say is, um, for myself as a real estate lawyer, our team at Corman's LLP law firm, we close deals all over Ontario. So we work with many agents in different areas and different clients and different transactions. And one of the first things is when we come into the play, and it's really based on the client, based on the purchaser, the seller, the person who's refinancing the property, at what stage they plan to bring a lawyer into it. Uh, it even is as simple sometimes that somebody's going to go put an offer onto a property and they're saying, you know what, it's a very hot property and there's going to be an offer date and I'm putting the offer in 2 days. I'm competing against many people. Can you take a look at title now for me? And I tell them, hold on a minute here. So normally the way it would work is you would sign an offer as soon as the deal is firm. That's when normally I would search title. Whereas a lot of and our law firm, whereas a lot of law firms, what they say, Sean, is like this: you have a deal closing in 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
Your search is due 2 weeks before closing,
Right.
so we won't bother doing it till 2 weeks before closing. And I think that's a giant and wrong, and for many, many levels. Besides the fact that it's nice to have the information early on, so if there is an issue, we can deal with it and not leave it to the last minute. So for that person, for example, is going to put that offer in, and I work with them and the realtor, and they said, hold on a minute here, we're going to put this offer in. You know what? We just want to cross all our T's, dot our I's now. Can you pull title for us? We'll pay for it. That's fine. It's a minimal cost, but can you check now to see what our title looks like? And it's something as simple as saying, okay, here's who the registered owners are. This is the property. Do we see any funky looking easements right away? They're old mortgages. Maybe sometimes there's an old mortgage sitting from 50, 60 years ago that nobody took off. There's a lot of things we could find out early on in the game. And this is where I'd say for the clients and the relationships that I have with them, when we form a relationship earlier in the game, not later in the game, and they can ask these type of questions, and we could do certain things in advance, like a title search, and have more of a comfort putting that offer in and having a smoother closing.
You know,
So that's just one step of something that we do.
and just to interrupt you really quick, like it's interesting that you say that you do it further ahead than just, right before closing, because I had a client recently that was, 2 weeks before closing, their lawyer searched title, and there was something on the house from 3 owners before. So how it got past the other 2 lawyers, we don't know. So we ended up having to actually search back, find the guys. The guy had died who had the lien registered against it. We had to find his daughter in a nursing home and have her sign off. So all that had to be done in the last week. But if the lawyer had actually looked, a month or two ahead of time, we wouldn't have been under such pressure. And this is why I always say, like, you don't need a great lawyer until you need a great lawyer, right? And so, making sure that you get someone who's looking after you from the beginning and taking the precautions to make it a smooth transaction is probably what you're hoping for.
I remember I had a set of clients, and it was a husband and wife. They were relocating, I believe, from the United States. They're coming back to Canada, and I got to know them. And we had a couple conversations as they started to plan in their minds. And I asked them certain probing questions. For example, how much risk do you like? How careful are you? How do you function yourself when you conduct transactions in your life generally? And I told him the reason I'm saying this is you're looking at a couple properties, and it's very clear from the property you sent me, these are properties that have been substantially renovated. These are properties that were in Toronto, with those mini tall homes with the
Yeah.
shared driveways and all that loveliness that can come up. And besides those issues, the old bungalows were torn down. They built new two stories, and I can see from just from the pictures in the description, this is like literally just got occupied, I'm sure. So this just got finished in each case. If we're gonna buy this property, I'm going to tell you right now, you have the chance, you can go and you're buying title insurance regardless. You're going to have insurance in place to protect your title. One of the items is if there turns out to be an open building permit or an issue with this property after the fact, title insurance will be there to help you close the permit and deal with the seller, etc. But I said, let me ask you this because I don't have to search for those building permits, but what if I did? And you could find out in advance and know you have that part clean going into closing versus just relying on the insurance saying, you know what, I'll take my risk because you're planning to put a pool in, you're planning to put a fence, you're gonna have to find these things out anyways. Wouldn't we rather know now? If it was me, I'd rather know now. Some people tell me, don't search because I don't want to deal with the headache. And if it turns out there's an issue, title insurance will take care of it. And I told him, I'm gonna wave my magic wand. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I close 700 deals a year, just myself. I'm gonna bet you there's an open building permit. I'm positive of it. There was. I knew it. I just knew it. I had that spidey sense feeling, especially when they tell me that the seller is also the realtor and the builder. There's no way they closed all their permits, and they didn't. And it took over a month to close those permits. They were supposed to have a quick closing, but we checked from the beginning, and it closed the day of close. They got those permits closed the day of closing, so they didn't have to extend the transaction. We actually got it done smoothly, but it's because we did in advance and we took the precautions.
So then that initial search that you guys are doing, you're looking for mortgages against the property, liens against the property, building permits. I guess if there's any other encumbrances, if there's right of ways or easements on the property.
If I have a corporate seller, I want to see that the corporation's in good standing. I want to see who's the registered director's officers. So I will do those type of searches. So it depends on the property, depends on the nature of the owner. And again, it's forming that relationship between lawyer client. It's understanding from the beginning who the client is, what kind of property they're planning to buy, what's their intention with the property, and make sure we have a good game plan going into it. Can't tell you how many times I've stopped the client and said, hold on a minute here. You're asking me questions about taxes. And I'm telling you right now, based on your property, I can't answer these. I'm not the tax lawyer. I'm not the accountant. You need to immediately go to your accountant. We need to double check on this. You're buying vacant land, it's zone residential, so there shouldn't be an HST issue. But your seller says HST in addition to the price, if applicable. And they're telling you, I guarantee you it's not applicable. So I'm like, if it doesn't apply, just put HST into the price then. Don't worry about it. But they won't do it. You go talk to your accountant. I'm telling you, nobody could do this search. You'd have to know the seller. You'd have to know their status and the status of the property. Nobody can know that without looking at their tax filings. And sure enough, HST is going to apply. Client walks away. If client had listened to their realtor and said, the other agent says, don't worry about it, so don't worry about it, there's going to be a massive HST bill.
Um, okay, so we get through and everything on title's good and we're happy, we're gonna close. And now I know you guys do adjustments at the time of closing. But what exactly, it's taxes, it's what is it you guys are adjusting?
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Well, the first thing I'd say is there is if I'm going to throw one other item, Sean, is this, the agreement is in. There's a firm deal. They've retained their lawyer. We do the title search. Title looks clean. Keep in mind, we got to know who the clients are. We got to know what their mortgage situation is. Because again, we're preparing for a smooth closing. Can't tell you how many times people said to me, we're a couple, we're going to get engaged, we're going to get married. Should we hold the properties joint tenants, tenants in common? I don't have good credit, so I'm going to put the property all in one name. Is that going to affect the legal rights of the other person? Mom's going to lend us money. Is she going to put a mortgage on? Maybe she'll go on title. So one of the first things that people have to understand, do we have a foreign buyer situation here? It's a lot of probing, again, knowing those clients. So even knowing the property, now I get to know these clients and understanding who's involved, how we're going to take title, are we going to get a mortgage, understanding that the mortgage and title have to match. So if the lender comes back and says two people are on the mortgage, two people are going on title, things like that. I can't tell you how many times I've been given a deal where it's a firm deal, the client didn't retain a lawyer, it's now a week before closing, and turns out somebody has to come off title. Somebody's going to go on title. The mortgage has an issue. This is again where getting the structure, the foundation set up from the beginning, understanding who the clients are and what they need, it's going to be a much smoother closing if we can have that set up very early in the game. Now, I've had situations where the day before closing, we've had to take somebody off the agreement, add somebody on the agreement. We'd had to revise that agreement with the seller. The seller had to agree to do that. So there's a lot of legwork, sometimes even getting to that point where we get to the appointment and do the adjustments. And it's
Okay.
funny because a lot of the clients, and you were right, because one of the first thing people ask me is how much it's going to cost me to close. They're going to ask me what adjustments there are. And
Right.
I told them, like, we need to make sure we can close in the first place and make sure how we're closing. Because, man, there have been times that people have closed and just rush, rush, rush and said it's all good. And then their account come back to them a year later and said, you made a giant mistake. You took the money from your corporation to close, so you should have closed on your corporation. Now I want you to put the
Yeah.
property in the corporation name, and now to fix it, we're gonna have to pay new land transfer tax, possible gains. So setting the structure from the beginning. So what I always tell clients is don't worry about closing and adjustments and numbers yet. Make sure we have the foundation and make sure who's closing and how. And that's usually in unison between the lawyer and the accountant. Get your tax
Okay.
plan in order first, then we make sure we're closing it the right way, and then we'll go into the numbers. Does that help?
Well, that makes sense. Like I said, like there's so much more to it than just, I check title and do some adjustments and then I'm out the door, right? And so, it's good to hear all the different layers that you're going through to protect. That's basically what you're doing is protect the client, make sure that they're doing everything in their best interest.
What I tell clients is I think a lot of people get very exhausted by the time they're coming time to closing. They've been planning their down payment, arranging for their mortgage, their insurance, looking at properties, putting offers, lost the offer, at the multiple bids on another offer, and very times that by the time they come to the lawyer, they're tired and they're not sure of what the process is. And it's the fear of the unknown that makes people very sometimes agitated and upset. And I love to sit down with first time buyers, Sean, and walk them through the process. I'm saying this is how it's going to go now. You sign an agreement. I'm going to tell you every single step between the time you sign this agreement to the time I hand you the keys or you pick up the keys from the lockbox. And having that certainty makes a nice, smooth closing. And then they come to realize adjustments, people are worried, oh, I have to do a property tax adjustment. It's going to be a couple $100, maybe $1,000 either way.
Right.
I tell them if you are at the point that a couple hundred, 1,000 is going to be an issue in the biggest purchase of your life, that's a problem. So
Right.
obviously it's good to start with the realtor and the mortgage broker and come with a game plan and a budget and understanding if I buy a property for $800,000, how much do I need out the door to make that happen? We can have nice loose numbers that way, but it's getting that mortgage, working in advance with the mortgage broker, making sure how much the down payment is, where the down payment's coming from, and making sure how much it's one thing to have a mortgage on a $800,000 property, let's say for 600,000, but is the bank actually giving the lawyer 600?
Right.
Maybe you didn't put down the required amount and they're pulling out high premium insurance. So you borrowed 600, but the lawyer's only getting 550. Well, that 50,000 has to come
It's
from
got to come from
somewhere.
someone. Yeah.
Yes. And this is where, unfortunately for you and I, it's always nice. You love to have a scenario where you have a great realtor, a great lawyer, a great mortgage broker. Everybody works together, everybody's on the same page, and everybody's communicating the information to the client. But unfortunately for clients, I always tell them if one professional drops the ball, it makes everybody else's job 10 times as hard. So one of the first things is get the right professionals in place and get them in place as soon as possible. Get them introduced to one another. Get them talking with each other. It'll make your closing that much more beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. It's like I always tell people, it's like we're a band, right? And if one person in the band can't play a note, then the band sounds awful, regardless of how good the other people are, right? So,
And I always use the baseball analogy where Sean is the starting pitcher. He's
yeah,
pitched 7, 8 innings, as far as pitching the whole game. He has the lead. He hands it off to me as the closer, and my job is to go get the last 3, 4 outs and save the game, and that's it. And if the closer blows the game, no one remembers the other 7, 8 innings, and it's one of those things as a team we have to work together. So this is where having professionals that understand one another and communicate. I always tell my clients, please let me know who they are, introduce us right away and everybody professionals, it shouldn't be hard to get them on the phone. It shouldn't be hard to have the questions answered. Everybody should be accessible because again, I always tell professionals this is the person's biggest purchase, sale, transaction of their lives. They're relying on professionals. Professionals need to be there for their clients.
okay. And so we've got through all that. We're at the adjustment period. The
Yes.
adjustments, like you said, are maybe a tax bill. Um, you know,
Common expenses if you're buying a condo and the seller paid the common expenses for the month and it's halfway through the month, so now you got to readjust back for half a month's worth. Maybe there might be a propane tank, oil tank to adjust for the amount of propane and the tank rental. These are all minimal. It's the adjustments with the seller, generally is not huge depending on the numbers we're talking about. Like if you're buying a $3-4 million home and you're adjusting for property taxes and paid full for the year, you could be hit with a $20,000 bill. But this is money that's not extra for the buyer. If the seller paid the municipality,
right,
the
right,
buyer would have had to pay it anyways. All they're doing is reimbursing back. So it's money in, money out, really.
right,
To
right,
me, it comes down to the bread and butter is what I need to know is how much money is the lender actually funding. Never mind how much you got approved for, what, because sometimes there's a holdback also. They're saying, I'm lending you 600,000, but I'm only going to disperse 500. 100 is being held back or 100 is not going to exist. The buyer needs to know how much money the lender is depositing into the real estate account for the real estate lawyer. So that way they can understand here's how much money I owe to the seller to pay the land transfer tax, to pay the lawyer and their fees and disbursements because we're doing a title search, registrations. So all that money you owe minus the money coming from the mortgage, what's the total? And that's that magical total. That's the most important information for a client. It's called the trust ledger. So the trust ledger is the most important document in a real estate transaction for a client. This is where you see in broad numbers the amount owing to the seller of your purchaser, how much all your fees are, your disbursements, your land transfer tax, and you see the grand total of how much you owe minus the money coming in from your mortgage that's actually being given, and then what's the balance. Even when you're a first-time buyer, that ledger should show here's the total land transfer tax that you should pay, here's how much you're eligible for the rebate, and you're only going to pay the difference on closing. A lot of people think as first-time buyers, oh, I got to pay the full amount and apply back to the government to get it back after closing. No, we apply for it at the time of closing. You disclose to your lawyer you're a first-time buyer, and they check off the right box in the computer system. You're only going to pay the difference, but that has to be stipulated early on. So all the client really needs, the most important thing is bottom line, lawyer, how much am I depositing into your account? And I need to do it before closing and need to know that amount. And that's a number that, for clients, if they take money from the RSPs or from investments and they have to break it open, they obviously want to know those numbers as soon as possible. Generally, we have that information about a week before closing
mhm,
because we don't have the adjustments from the seller till about a week before closing. We don't have the numbers from the mortgage off until a week before closing. So this is all happening within that week. So that's where pre-budgeting, broad numbers with the mortgage broker, the realtor, and the lawyer, at least the client will have a ballpark idea of how much they're going to owe so that they can get ready in advance.
right. And again, this is like what I've said to people is, you can always get a mortgage broker that's a little cheaper. You can always get a lawyer that's a little cheaper. You can always get a real estate agent that's a little cheaper, but you are not getting someone who's going to look after you in this way, right? So you're going through this and you're talking about all the different levels and all the things you're doing to protect people. The same way that when I'm out, trying to get them to buy a house, I have a guy, I walked him away from 3 deals. He said he couldn't understand it. I said, because you're overpaying or it's the wrong market. But that's because we're long-term people who are doing this forever, and I want a client forever, not just for today, right? And so, I think we're all competitive in pricing, but when people are looking for that like 5% discount, they think that there's no difference. That's why I wanted this video is to show there is a difference, not just in real estate agents, but in the lawyer side as well.
I apologize in advance to Mr. Lube. I don't have a relationship with Mr. Lube. I don't have any interest in any oil and lube companies, but I always tell clients this example. This is the biggest purchase of your life. This is the biggest asset of your life. If you owned a Bentley, would you go get the oil change for the Bentley and Mr. Lube and save a few bucks? You'd go take your $300,000 car and save $50 on the oil change, let's say? Probably not. If you think about, it's madness, Sean. You have a million, let's say take a typical $1 million house. $1 million house is what $1 million house used to be. When
Right.
back in our day, when $1 million was $1 million, when I was growing up, $1 million bought you a mansion of 3 cars, etc. Now $1 million in a lot of areas is barely buying you a townhouse.
Right.
That's the reality of inflation and everything else. But this is the most amount of money a person ever going to spend. $1 million versus $100, $50 here. I don't see the math of it. Because let's say you go for the cheapest realtor, you go for the cheapest lawyer. You're saying, you know what, I'm saving here $50, I'm saving $2,000 there. My question to them is, okay, and you have a bunch of questions. An issue comes up. When you go for the cheapest, either they're not going to respond to it, or guess what? The clock is starting now. And now all of a sudden, when you see your bill is way more than if you gone to the right place from the beginning. And one of the things is when a client calls me up with an issue, I don't immediately start the clock and say, hold on a minute here now. Okay, send me a retainer now. I need another $500 to have this conversation. I tell them, look, an issue's come up. We're having this discussion. I'm not charging you for this discussion. I need to write a letter for you. I'm going to write that letter for you. Now, you have to understand if this goes back and forth and there's multiple issues, it's beyond a standard transaction, but I give them that clarity. But I write a courtesy email, I write a courtesy letter. I don't immediately start that clock. I have a client that reviews a stash certificate. They want to buy a resale condo. They don't end up going with that condo. We end up reviewing 3 condo stash certificates. I don't charge them 3 times. I still charge the once because it's about relationships. It's about having comfort. And this is where I tell people, ultimately, you spend sometimes, a few dollars more, you're actually gonna get way more value and you're going to spend a lot less in the long run.
Well, and I think, and this was part of the reason that, and I'm thrilled that you came on to speak with me, is that people don't understand sometimes. So really, like I think most people think he checks the title, that takes what, like 20 minutes, and then he, transfers, makes the adjustments, and he transfers the money. And so when they look at that, they go, why should I pay him more than the other guy? The same way as some people look at a real estate agent and go, they all put it just on realtor.ca and they walk away, right? And so when you see the layers that are involved and you see, what a good professional does versus someone who maybe is a discount agent or discount lawyer, then people should understand why one is a little bit more and why it's in their best interest to go in that direction.
One thing I mentor my young lawyers with, and I have a very strong philosophy with my partner, David Corman and Corman's LP. When I talk to a client, I tell them, look, I don't want you to think of me as a lawyer and lawyering closing deals. My job is to make your life easy. I'm the make your life easy business. And who, Sean, doesn't want their lives to be easier? I always tell, not just the lawyer, think about an accountant, think about the person who changes the tires in your car, think about your gardener, your cleaning person, whoever, any professional that you hire, and you start going down the list. Bottom line is, are they making your life easy? Do you have a relationship with them? Do they understand your expectations? Do they communicate with you? Do they get the job done? And that's the kind of professional you need. I remember growing up, I had an accountant and he was a great guy. I loved the guy to pieces, but I could never get a hold of him ever. I would call on the phone, wouldn't pick up, send him an email, wouldn't respond. I'd have to call reception, get reception to dig everywhere in the office, and that was the only way I could ever get a hold. Otherwise, I never got a communication. And then all of a sudden, I said after 10, 15 years, I don't need this. This is stressing me out. And I went to work with a new account. I got referred to someone, and all of a sudden, even gives me a cell number. I can text him. He responds back right away. I can have an appointment anytime. I communicate my needs. If I have an issue, I get responses. I have solutions, tangible solutions. I'm like, wow, this is making my life easy. And what do? I don't look at the bill. I don't even worry about the amount. I worry that I want the results and that I feel good about the process. And this is where ultimately in a real estate transactions, again, we come back to finding the right professional. For a client, it should be so easy. By the time you sign up with the lawyer and you're waiting for those keys, you should be an expert knowing exactly the process, and it should feel like the greatest thing in the world. If you are a person buying a piece of real estate and you are stressed to no end at the point you got the keys, I think the professionals didn't walk you along and didn't help you as they should have. So this is where it comes down to get the right people in place to make your life easier.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you coming on today, spreading a little knowledge. And we're going to have Jonathon on, hopefully, on a semi-regular basis. And we can start getting into, more things like what's title insurance, what's, status certificate, and have him explain a little more in depth. But for today, that was amazing, and I appreciate your time.
And you're a celebrity realtor, and I know you have a big fan base. I've seen you on social media, so I would say to those fans, send in those questions. Please, I'd love to hear from you. And I think as the lawyer, people have something imminent or they're thinking of, send it off to Sean and myself. We'd love to talk about it on the air, and I love the interaction. It's especially Sean. We can think about what people want to hear, and we'll definitely give them that information. But I'd love to hear from the audience, and we'll answer the questions each episode. It'd be great.
Awesome. All right. Well, look forward to catching up with you again. And once again, appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Cheers.